Hello to everyone joining us so far. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll just give a minute or two for everybody to log in, and we'll start the session in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, I think we can get started. We've got a good number of people already in the webinar. So hello, good evening from the UK, as I'm sure a few of you are joining us from outside of the UK. I'm Sophie, and it's my huge pleasure to welcome you to the first event hosted by the U21 Autism Research Network. Before we get started, I want to give you a short introduction to our network and how the event will be run. So we've set up the network with funds from Universitas 21, an organisation representing universities from across the globe, and their funding aims to encourage researchers from different countries to work together online. And our U21 Autism Research Network specifically aims to bring together autism researchers from these universities with the goal of making our research more diverse, inclusive, and therefore more relevant to a wider range of people. Later in the event, you will hear a little bit more about our research plans, how they are relevant to the global autistic community, and how you can get involved in these. But one of our main visions from this network was to host this online webinar to increase discussion around diversity and inclusion in society and research for the autistic community. This evening, you'll hear two main panel discussions, and those will start at 6:20 and 7:20 p.m. UK time. And we'll have an interval of around 10 minutes in the middle of those. And the first of those panels will be 4 individuals with lived experience of autism. And the second panel will consist of 4 individuals from research, clinical, and charity backgrounds. So we'd also like to keep the webinar interactive as much as we can whilst we're all at home. And you'll have the opportunity to respond to some of the polls that will appear on your screen. We're going to give you an example of one of these polls now, so hopefully shortly you'll see that appear. And if you feel happy to respond to the questions that appear on the screen, please do, and we can get an idea of who's joined us today. And whilst you fill out that poll, we would also invite you to submit questions for the panelists using the Q&A function, or on our Twitter using the Twitter hashtag U21Autism2021, or by tagging us at Autism U21. There'll be a little bit of time towards the end of each panel discussion where we'll aim to answer these questions, but we just ask you to be respectful to the panelists when you're using this function. And again, whilst you finish completing that poll, we note that there are different opinions on preferred ways to refer to autism, but I wanted to highlight that we will mostly use identity-first language during this webinar, for example, autistic person. And this is in line with guidelines from a recent article by Lorcan Kenny and colleagues, who asked members of the autistic community about their autism language preferences. So now we're going to have a look at the poll. So I'm hopefully going to share that with you now. So hopefully you're all seeing that on the screen. And what we can see is that we've got a large number of researchers in the audience today, but we've also got individuals with autism, their family and friends, as well as individuals from clinical, charity, education, government backgrounds, and also some general members of the public who are interested in what we're talking about. So that's really great for us to see. And we also appear to have people joining us from all over the world, which is also great to see. So I'm glad that we're having a global impact with the event. It's really good to have you all with us today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our host for the panel discussions today, and that's Matt Bond. And Matt is the chair of the University of Birmingham's Autism Research Consultancy Committee, but his main profession is as a lecturer, singer, actor, and vocal consultant. Matt previously played an active role in the disability rights movement and is passionate about improving the lives of and opportunities for the autistic community. And Matt will be working with us to try and make sure this event creates long-term discussions about diversity, inclusion, and representation for the autistic community. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Matt to give you his brief introduction and then also to introduce you to our first set of panelists. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to you joining us this evening to our U21 partners in Japan, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, here in the UK, and to the autism community across the globe. So as Sophie just mentioned there a second, I chair B Park Consultancy Committee at the University of Birmingham. It was an idea that was explored 2 years ago after I came to the university to take part in some research. And I had some thoughts about the way that the research was conducted. And I had some discussions with some senior academics in the psychology department, and it was decided that the best way to address these was to set up a committee for the autism community to feed into the psychology department, the autism research team, about best practice, about how we thought that their practice could change to better reflect the needs of the autism community. And since then it's grown, it's kind of grown in scope to start to include representatives from service providers, parents and carers, kind of what I refer to as stakeholders in the autism community, but kind of with the goal of the goal that the research is identified and is kind of we help direct the research that takes place, and individual researchers, they bring their research to the committee. We evaluate it in terms of whether we feel it's going to have a positive impact on the lives of autistic people, whether we feel that it's going to be conducted in an ethical way, especially if, of course, autistic people are going to be involved in the research. Yeah, that's what we do. We've been doing that for the past couple of years, and it's been quite we've had a fair bit of success so far. So we're hoping that that is going to continue into the future. As you are well aware, tonight we will be discussing a variety of issues around the theme of diversity in autism. Diversity is a topic that seemingly becomes more and more prescient in today's world, from the global Black Lives Matter movement and the responses to attacks on people of colour, to the recent anti-misogyny vigils here in the UK and many assorted ongoing battles in various countries to end discrimination against disabled people and LGBT plus people. It becomes clearer by the day that voices that have been silenced for so long are speaking up through peaceful and non-peaceful means. And tonight, we attempt to join the dots between being an autistic person and negotiating multiple identities. Many people on our panels and joining us online tonight negotiate multiple identities every day. Indeed, a report unveiled by Cambridge University 2 days ago shows that autism is more common in children than previously thought, with rates higher in black children than their white peers. Yet autistic people often feel that the services and professionals that are meant to help them, the academia that is meant to increase knowledge in order to improve their lives, and those who advocate for them still fail to represent their other identities and is still very white, middle class, and heteronormative. We will be doing our best to get to the heart of these matters this evening, and you can help us by leaving your questions and comments. I understand people have left questions for us during the sign up, and we'll also be dipping in and out of the Twitter sphere as well, and we very much look forward to receiving those. And for those of you who find, I hope that you all find tonight very informative and very useful, and that we all learn. I'm hoping that we all learn a lot this evening. It is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube after tonight as well, for you to refer back to. Okay. Without further ado, if it's okay, I think we're running about 5 minutes early, which is good. It allows a bit more time for discussion. I would like to introduce to you our fantastic panel of autistic experts who have kindly agreed to share some of their experiences of being autistic and being part of a diverse community today. So Maya Elliott is a young patient activist. Hi, Maya. And has given a range of talks advocating for better mental health services for young persons. She has won several prizes for her educational work, among them recently the Special Achievement Award at the British Education Awards in 2019. Maya, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your autism diagnosis means to you?
Hi, thank you for introducing me. It was a very lovely introduction. My name is Maya, if you can speak Welsh, and Maya if you can't. Don't worry about the pronunciation. I am an autistic person, but I also have a history of being in the psychiatric system, including in hospitals and psychiatric wards. I am also a marine biologist in training, so I spend most of my time either looking at or thinking about marine creatures, including seals. My autism diagnosis, to me, I think it's freedom to understand my own wants and needs, freedom to know who I truly am, and I guess a freedom to make informed decisions as well and ask for the support and services that I need. I hope that answers your questions.
The old mute unmute thing. I'm sure that will happen a few times. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great, Maya. On to Savan. Savan is a content creator who speaks about his experiences as an autistic British Asian on his YouTube channel, Savan Films. I urge you all to subscribe As a content creator and production coordinator, he has produced work for Sky, for the BBC Radio 1 and BBC Click, and the National Autistic Society and Pink News. Savan, tell us a little about yourself and what it means to be autistic.
Hi, everyone. I am, as you say, I'm an autistic content creator on YouTube. I've been on YouTube for nearly 10 years now, which is quite a long time considering. YouTube, it has been where everything has started for me. 7 Films started in 2014, and I started doing my autism series in 2017. So that's where everything started and it all began. Being autistic means to me that you see the world very differently to everyone else, even to other autistic people. We see the world very differently, but we all are united in the same goal to make the world a better place for just not us, but also for everyone around us.
Okay, thank you, Sav. Looking forward to hearing more from you in a bit. Now, I'm excited to introduce Marla Thapar to you. Marla is a mom to a 16-year-old autistic boy and is also part of our Birmingham Autism Research Consultancy Committee, where she, together with myself and a range of other autistic experts, give advice to researchers on how to conduct their studies in an autism-friendly way, as I mentioned earlier. Marley, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your son, and what an autism diagnosis means for you and your son?
The autism diagnosis was probably the easiest part of my particular journey and my lived-in experiences. I've actually got 2 boys with autism, and my eldest son is 16. He wants to have a career in media. And more so during lockdown, we love to watch cooking shows and experiment, may I add, experiment new recipes. And we spent a lot of time during this unexpected valuable time as a family. A little bit more about me. I'm a British-born Asian, and growing up in the 70s was never easy. I encountered racism, and I never saw it for my eldest son. I thought it would change by now. As you go through it and get desensitized over the years, you sense racism immediately. And I remember being at school and I was pinned up, against the wall and name called and told to, threats that, I should never ever speak about being bullied and so forth. The teacher said at the same school said that I'd amount to nothing. Well, I graduated at De Montfort University, so that was a real wrongful statement to make. And since having my own children, I felt things would be different, and I felt things would change, but they really haven't. My younger son has never experienced racism within his school. Sadly, my eldest one has, but more about that later.
Could I just ask you, obviously, as I said in my introduction, kind of the theme of diversity becomes more and more prescient by the minute, it seems. And this morning we did there was the unveiling of government reports kind of saying that institutional racism was almost an unhelpful notion. What do you feel about that?
I disagreed with it. I sort of briefly skimmed through it, but there was no specifics to disability and racism within disability.
Yes.
So I did notice that, and it was very sort of woolly worded, if you like, and it was referred back to the Department of Education.
Yeah, it was. Okay.
So that saying nothing speaks volumes.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. Well, I'm sure we will hear some more about that later on. Last but most certainly not least, let me welcome Sarai Parler to our panel. Sarai lives in Germany, is a medical doctor, but with a passion for languages. She recently transitioned into a career as a medical translator. Sarai, can you tell us a little bit more about you and what being autistic means to you?
So I am, yes, thank you for the introduction, first of all. Yes, I live in Germany and I am a medical translator now. I work from Japanese, German, and Dutch into English, and I would, without being autistic, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing now. I am obviously very grateful to have studied medicine. It's given me such an amazing understanding of the human body and how we as human beings work from the inside. But I could not, being autistic to me really means like giving a name to what makes me different. In every environment that I've been in, I've always felt a certain sense of disconnection from everyone else. And that also came through in the medical field, in a field where I assumed that people would be more understanding and more willing to accommodate differences and more willing to find answers. It was quite the opposite. So being autistic meant that I was able to sit with a challenge like, what am I going to, after studying this whole degree, what am I going to do? And still come through and find ways to get around that. And I think that's something that I think there are a lot of, this is maybe an arrogant thing to say, but I do think there are a lot of neurotypical people who would have given up a lot quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly, I'm sure a lot of autistic people would certainly agree with not being in the career that they're in, or not doing the passion that they do, kind of without the autism diagnosis. I think, yeah, a lot of us would empathise with that. Thank you so much, Sarai. And yes, so a final welcome to everyone on our panel this evening. It really is wonderful to have you here. We really are very lucky. Just before I go any further, I would also like to say a huge thank you to Sophie, Lydia, Bianca, Connor, and the rest of the U21 Autism Research Network, and to Caroline and the other academics in the autism research team at the University of Birmingham. We would not be able to do this without you. You've all worked incredibly hard and been incredibly supportive and forward thinking. I'm sure a lot of us on the panels are very pleasantly surprised that people in academia can be so forward thinking in terms of facilitating something like this and enabling not just autistic voices, but a diverse range of autistic voices to be heard. So a massive thank you to them. Now, topic one this evening is misconceptions about autism. Common misconceptions about autism, experiences of stigma, hostility experienced because of autism, misconceptions by health professionals, educational professionals, etc. I'll kick off with Sarai. Have you encountered any misconceptions that other people tend to have about being autistic?
Yes, quite a few. I'm sure that a lot of them are going to come up again and again from other people. But I mean, obviously the first one for me, it's usually, but you don't look autistic. Like there's some kind of look that you have when you're autistic, but you don't look autistic. You don't seem autistic. Oh, I know someone who's autistic and they're not like you, so you can't be autistic. Or I've worked with people with autism and they are, you seem fine. You must be very mildly affected by it. These are the kinds of things that I get to hear. It is much more difficult, I think, coming from the perspective of a woman who has autism, because it's obviously something that people generally tend to expect to see in men. So that's often difficult, because then you get the stereotypical, oh, but Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory has autism and he doesn't do what you do. He doesn't have the difficulties that you have. And it's like, I mean, so many issues with that. I mean, especially from a medical perspective, the fact that he has never been diagnosed with anything, I could go on about that for hours. But but the idea that is the first person that people think of. I dream of a world where when I say I'm autistic, someone will go, oh, I mean, if it had been different, that I would have said I'm autistic, and they'll go, oh, I know this other, South African, Black, whatever woman who is autistic, and I saw her doing this and this and this and this. Now that's so cool. And, now I found someone who, someone else like that.
Instead of Sheldon or Rain Man.
Yes, yeah, no, I'm tired of the stereotypical, white male outcast sort of, trope thing. It's enough with that. Like, we're not all. I think that trying to put autistic people into boxes is one of the problems that we have, both within and outside of the medical field. And trying to find a way to sort of, again, be able to kind of look at people and say, that's an autistic person, that isn't isn't an autistic person. That's part of the problem that we have, and why we need so many people advocating for autism today, to make it clear that this is not a, this is not along racial or gender or sex or, like educational lines. This affects everyone, and it affects everyone differently.
Savan, what do you think non-autistic people often get wrong about autism?
A lot. There's a lot of awareness out there, but there's still a lot of stigma around being autistic in society, especially in the UK. They still think about that autism is caused by vaccines, which has been disproven so many times. The example that really, a lot of hard work in the autism advocacy community, especially those who have been trying to make people aware, but also accept us more. See as a good example of just basically undoing all the hard work over the past few years in a matter of seconds. Just really tore the community apart and just basically undone everything everyone's been doing for a long time now. And it doesn't help. We weren't trying to get Sia off social media or anything like that. We just wanted her to learn. She could have reached out to the community and actually made a film about an autistic person much better if she actually directly talked to people and charities who actually work with autistic people for the good of autistic people. So we have to rebuild again.
Could you just explain what issues did you have with Sia's film?
I haven't watched it. I watched the trailer and I was put off from watching that trailer as well, because they got this. They played on really hard on the stereotypes, especially those who are non-verbal autistic people. The controversy around it as well, that it blew up on social media, especially on Twitter. It really riled up a lot of people, and they were just basically telling people, please don't, if you love and support us, please don't watch the movie. Do not support Sia. Do not support her work. Don't get Maddie involved either. Like, don't put your hate towards her. She was just a part of this. Don't, do all this. I was just furious. I shared on Instagram a few stuff about the movie. Please don't watch it if you care about me and stuff. Autistic people have watched the movie, and also there were a lot of articles, especially in the UK media, telling people not to watch it. Autistic people writing articles as well, which was shared on social media. They were saying, don't watch it, please don't. The National Autistic Society as well, talking about it. we were all talking about it in general, and
it kind of harks back a little bit to the I Am Autism video from Autism Speaks.
Yes, we
about
regard
a decade
Autism
ago.
Speaks as a hate group.
Yes.
And especially around the campaigns of light it blue, red instead. That's coming up in the autistic community, more about autism acceptance, but they want, the community now wants, and I agree with a lot of autistic people, is now time for, rather than awareness, we've got awareness. Acceptance is the next step, logical step, but autistic pride.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
autistic
no, very much. Very much so. So I think we can see the I think we all acknowledge the power, the kind of negative power that representations and representations in the media of autistic people have. But Marla, you the charity you work for, the Anna Kennedy Online, that also has Katie Price as kind of their chief ambassador, and kind of her journey, Katie Price's journey, has been quite enlightening for a lot of people, and has put kind of another side of the autistic experience out into the wider world. Do you think that her experience and the way that has been shared through the media, do you think that's had a positive impact?
Absolutely. I think described and the struggles she transition was brought across so well to the media, and there's been so much more about it, in terms of media awareness. There's also been Small Acts. There was a BBC series of Small Acts, which was like a short set of films, and one of the actual films was called Education, and it related to the difficulties within special needs within the 70s. Last week there was a program called Black Power Movement, which was also aired on the BBC, which is really, really powerful. And in my opinion, and sort of back then and coming to now, what really has changed? Parents are still struggling. Katie Price, every parent is struggling to find that right provision for their child that they're rightfully entitled to. But there seems to be an uphill battle and a constant battle with authorities, where parents like myself are sort of stigmatized as like the difficult parent, or just wanting too much and so forth. I mean, they say that ethnic communities are often hard to reach, but we're only hard to reach if you've not been looking for us. Yeah. Support across like public domains, education practices, like the prejudices, like to reduce those prejudices between the public and the people of ASD over time. I mean, council should really have a regard to a set of principles, recognising the importance of views, wishes and feelings of the parents and the child, and to ask the parent, because the child is supposed to be the centre of the focus, just like Harvey is the heart of that documentary. Kingsley, the character within Small Acts, was the heart of what that child needs, and that's not often delivered, I feel. And I think there needs to be a lot more media coverage in terms of raising awareness, and specifically towards ethnic communities, because every community, every child presents themselves differently. But
yeah, very much.
We all have the same parents. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for different cultures, and I can only relate to my own lived-in experiences as a parent of 2 children with autism. But I do believe that there's so many reports out there that have clearly reflected the disparities, the access to the support and the provisions that are available out there, and the people in charge out there lose that opportunity to engage with the community, and this actually mitigates the production of the effects of the stigma, and it's then leads to like what I believe is system, because you're actually for like 2 protected characters.
Thank you, Marla. Maya, could you tell us, have you experienced hostility because of stigmas or misconceptions about what it means to be autistic?
Certainly, and actually it builds on the point that everyone's brought up, particularly Sarai, who said the comment of, but you don't look autistic. I mean, that is a form of hostility. That is saying that that's insinuating that I'm lying by saying that I'm autistic. So that is a form of hostility. And I think all those comments of you don't look autistic, or even just being autistic in public. So because I'm someone who stims a lot as well, I get a lot of hostility from public who look at that and immediately start to have judgments about who I am, or judgments about what I'm doing there, or why am I doing that in public. And hostility is something that I encounter every day, whether or not it's just being out and about in the community, and from comments such as, but you don't look autistic, or from gazes when I'm stimming in public, or even from healthcare workers when I'm trying to access care, or from education workers when I'm trying to engage in education, or from employers when I want to be employed. But all of this inability for or all of the things that are inaccessible to me are they're hostile. That's the reason I can't access them, is because they're hostile to me as an autistic person and to the autism community. And having to keep facing that every day, it takes a lot to be able to even get up and go out and leave my house. And I think we need to start thinking about how that hostility is impacting the health of each individual autistic person.
Very much, and I think, I mean, I have Asperger's syndrome, and probably one of the common one of the common issues that I face, certainly when I was trying to access services when I was younger, was the whole problem around presenting as someone who, I excelled academically. I did theatre, so a lot of the social issues that people looked for in people with Asperger's and autism, that they didn't present. Even when for a 15-year-old boy to try explaining to those people that, well, these are learned behaviours. I've learned how to get on, and then I did actually try to explain that, and they were like, well, a 15-year-old boy shouldn't be able to explain that, so we can't deal with this. I'm sure a lot of people recognise the issues you've just highlighted there. Just touching a little bit on what Sarai said about you have our Sheldons and our Rainmans. Do you feel that there are any autistic female role models, or people that you can point to who you identify with at all? Maya, yes, or anyone who wants to chip in.
I've got one.
Have you got one? I haven't got one.
The actress, or not the actress, but the character Temple Brennan in the series Bones. I don't know if any of you watched that, but there's a character.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
There's a character in the series Bones. Now she doesn't have a formal diagnosis in the series, but the way that her character is portrayed is like I don't know, it's just like a textbook, it's a textbook sort of autism. She has textbook autism characteristics. She's extremely well educated, extremely intelligent, but also in the show they play a lot on her physicality. So she's like this kind of really awesome example of an all-rounder. I mean, her social life is not great. Her social life is not great, but she lives such a full and rich life in spite of having extreme social difficulties, often, I mean, frequently leading to conflict. But yet she's still an all-rounder, and she still has this balanced life. And I mean, I think many of us who are autistic can probably relate to the fact that it's associated with a lot of mental health issues. That's one of the characters that I feel shows that if you have the training and ability and power to sort of put yourself in a position where you're doing things that you love all the time, and that you're staying healthy and active and all those kinds of things, like all of that contributes to having better mental health. And I think that's really, to me, that's really powerful. That's who I would say. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know that at least there is at least one person you can point to. Marla, what was it? So we're going to move on now to topic 2, to our second topic of the evening, barriers and representation. So we're going to look at barriers to diagnosis and inclusion, but also why does representation matter? And different forms of representation, media, democratic representation, representation in academia and services, etc. So Marla, could you tell us what it was like for you when your son received his autism diagnosis?
Ironically, I was one of the lucky, looking back, I was one of the lucky parents who my son received diagnosis at the age of 3. And that was the easy part. It was a case of, back in them days, we didn't have smartphones. So it's a case of, here's a leaflet. And it was really like the barriers. I mean, whilst he was, very young when he received his diagnosis, my own community, it was like a taboo subject. And in my experience, it was a difficult path all those years ago. I didn't, nobody plans these things. I was actually pregnant with my second son at the time, and I knew nothing about autism at all. And the barriers I felt at that time was not having that sort of recognition, like within the community. And it was almost like, keep it quiet, don't tell anyone, he may grow out of it. That sort of thing was said to me, and I felt quite ostracized, and I felt like I was, sort of almost like you can't speak about it. It was one of those things within the communities, like, don't tell anyone, etc., etc. And that was, that was the start of a very long fight. I mean, representation matters because we all bring different perspectives to the table, and we all bring different experiences. And in the last year, as we mentioned earlier, racism has been exposed worldwide and so forth. But the problem I had was I felt quite suppressed, not being able to share it. I mean, I was lucky that back in 2011, I saw Anna Kennedy on the TV, and she was talking about bullying and racism. And at that time, my son was getting bullied at school because as he grew older, the gap widened in education, and and he was like an easy target, if you like. And I contacted, and that's how I met Anna. I contacted her, and she came and gave a plug-in talk to my son's school and raised autism awareness. And when I saw how passionately she spoke about her 2 sons, it sort of gave me a voice. And I thought, why should I keep it quiet? Why should I, why is this barrier up against me? Why should I stay quiet about it? So there was a position then, he was in mainstream at the time, going as an SEN governor. So I just went for the kill and I applied for it. And my statement went out to all the parents within the community, stating that I have a son with a disability, and that was that. That was one way of putting it out there, I guess. But I felt like her voice gave me a voice, and my voice then gave my son a voice, because then he asked if he was autistic. He was at an age where I could share his diagnosis, and it completely transformed him. The bullying stopped, and for the rest of the time he was there, barring the last part at the end. Really, and it just felt like doors. And I've been friends with Anna since, and you know, it's brought some.
Great. I mean, I think what you've said there highlights a really important. I think highlights something really important that you know, you said how Anna inspired you, and then you inspired your son. I think that's something we all have to take away, is that it's that old adage, you know, be the change yourself, and that can be difficult, and that can involve being really brave, and putting yourself into some uncomfortable situations. But I really do feel that is something that we all, as much as we can, because obviously it's not easy, it's not possible for everybody, but as much as we can, even if it's just saying positive things online on social media, you know, be that change, be that role model. If you don't see a role model, be that role model yourself. So thank you, Marla. I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but Savan, in your YouTube videos, you talk about the representation of autism in the media. And could you go in a little bit further about what you think about how autism has been represented in the media? I mean, could you give us, for example, say, I mean, you talked about a bad example, which is the series, but could you also give us a good example of how autism has been represented in the media?
There's a series called The A Word on BBC, BBC 102. It's been going on for a while now. It's a very good representation of autistic people. Yes, the person who's autistic is a white cisgender male. However, the portrayal is very good. They have a lot of research. They've done a lot of research behind the scenes and everything, and made it a proper portrayal of an autistic person, how they interact with the world and everything. That was one. There are other portrayals which it's difficult to say which ones are good, because sometimes you think it's good, but then it turns out to be not so good. That's the only one on my top of my head that I can think of that's been a good portrayal, because I haven't seen a portrayal featuring someone like me, British Asian. I haven't seen anyone like me properly. I might have missed it. There was actually one in Indian cinema, Bollywood. My Name is Khan. Bollywood actor Shah Rukh Khan portrayed an autistic character, someone who had Asperger's, and it was set in America and New York. That I thought was an okay portrayal of someone who was autistic. But that's the only one I can think of that had someone who looked like me. But his disability and everything was very different, you know, in the film. So with Bollywood especially, it's a hit and a miss with disabilities. My experiences of going to India and everything growing up, not knowing I was disabled back then, but especially I haven't been back to India since 2013. So my experiences of what happened growing up and everything would be obviously different now, knowing that I'm disabled and everything. So I think things go 2 steps forward for us and then goes backwards of quite a few steps. It's always a back and forth at the moment because the portrayal of autistic people. One autistic coded person, the Queen's Gambit, that of an potentially an autistic woman in growing up who became a chess prodigy. So there was a lot of talk in the autistic community about her being potentially autistic coded. So it's hard unless we know someone is actually autistic, or we would like to see more autistic actors portraying autistic characters, but also autistic actors portraying neurotypical people. because we can. Like,
I sometimes have the joy of that myself.
yeah,
Could I just ask, as an autistic individual from an Asian community,
yeah.
did you experience a similar kind of stigma to your diagnosis as Marla has touched on?
Yes, I have. Amongst the Gujarati community, I'm a part of Indian community. Um, I have seen stigma about disability and especially about mental health and everything. I've been very vocal about my mental health since 2014. Um, I was encouraged by my friends, my closest friends at the time, and my current closest friends as well, to be as open as possible about being autistic. I have my best friend is it also Gujarati as well. Um, we've known each other since we were kids. Uh, I would say that I was diagnosed when I was 24. So going back to I was like 2, my family knew, my parents knew, they knew that I had learning difficulties. They noticed the special needs people noticed when I was 2. So I had support throughout my life to university. It's only when I was 23 when one of my former work colleagues noticed, you're not just dyslexic, which I was diagnosed when I was 17. They missed it completely. Being dyslexic, the stigmas of surrounding being dyslexic wasn't as bad as someone who is autistic. Weirdly, it just like it wasn't as bad. I found in the Indian community in general, more people were like open about that than, let's say, mental health and disability. And I've met so many people who are Asian, especially those who are from the South Asian diaspora in the UK, telling me and openly telling me, I've got cousins, I've got brothers, I've got siblings, cousins, I've got all these people, I know someone who's autistic. I was like, why aren't, and they watch your videos. And I'm like, that's great. At least I'm giving them the voice, right? Hopefully.
Okay.
I hope so.
Thank you,
But
Sav.
yeah,
Thank you, Sav. Thank you, Sav.
yeah.
Maya, you were diagnosed quite late, at 15 years old. From your experience, can you tell us a little bit about why you think it took healthcare professionals so long to spot your autism?
I was quiet and I didn't disrupt anyone, is the very short answer. I sat in the back of the class. I didn't really speak. I didn't really speak to anyone so that no one brought up any concerns, because I wasn't the disruptive one in the class. I wasn't disruptive at home, and I wasn't disruptive when I was, seeing a health professional. So it was kind of the only reason I was diagnosed was when I started to be disruptive, because I was in distress, and that was the only way that I would have been diagnosed. And there were plenty of signs that I was autistic when I was growing up. I mean, a simple one was that I kept having to have hearing tests because everyone thought I couldn't hear, but actually it was more that I couldn't process voices. So I had like 3 hearing tests every year, and someone should have gone, oh, hang on a minute, it's not the hearing, it's something else. But because I never, I didn't have big meltdowns, I just had shutdowns, and I was really good in school. I did have a small group of friends, and they kind of adopted me rather than actually me actively making friends. But yeah, it took for me to become significantly distressed, which then started to disrupt other people's lives. That I eventually got diagnosed, and I only got diagnosed simply because of luck. The psychiatrist that was seeing me had a son with autism, and therefore had some personal experience, and that's the only way that he started to pick up on some of the autistic traits that I was exhibiting.
You mentioned previously that you have experience of mental health services. Could you how do you feel that your autism diagnosis affected the mental health care that you received?
In a very small number of cases, maybe one or two, I was under mental health care for 10 years of my life. And one or two professionals that I ever met, it improved my care because they had a decent understanding of what autism was. And they had the foresight to understand how me as an autistic person. In other cases, it made healthcare or made the care I received worse because the complete lacking of training and understanding and will of professionals to support me in the ways that I need to support. I mean, I've ended up in places such as psychiatric units that are really not the place I should have been. They were very, very unsuitable and actually made me worse. And I've had a lot of traumatic experiences because I'm an autistic person trying to access a service designed for neurotypical people. So it's a very complex question that I can't really answer detailed.
No, I understand in such a short amount of time. Sarai, you also had quite a late diagnosis of autism. Can you tell us a little bit about the barriers you faced and kind of the chances of diagnosis between South Africa versus Germany? And do you think it was harder for you to get a diagnosis because you're a black female?
I want to say I didn't see any opportunities at the time when I left South Africa. I didn't see any opportunities for diagnosis as an adult in South Africa. So I would say I don't think I would have been diagnosed if I hadn't left, if I hadn't immigrated to Germany. So that's one of the big things. So barriers to diagnosis. I mean, yes, I think because there's so many, it's really hard to narrow it down. There's the fact that we don't have a lot of people who specialize in autism. There isn't an established formal, it's not like cardiology or pediatrics where the field is well established and there's a long history of research and, and they're building on, it's like you have stories of people who, came up with stuff in the 1800s that is still being discussed and referenced today. We don't have that or we don't have as much of a culture within the field of medicine from a diagnostic perspective. That's something that disadvantages a lot of people, but especially if you don't fit this classical textbook picture of a young male with very poor social skills, etc. I mean, if you're female and if you're a person of color, you'll obviously be seen differently, or people will consider different explanations for your behavior than autism initially, and that does make it hard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Sarai. Thank you very much to our panelists for that question. We're just going to move on to our final topic, topic number 3. Challenges posed by society to autistic people and how we can change this. Just bearing in mind that I would like to get as many audience questions in as we can after, so if we can please try our best to keep our answers short and sweet for this topic. Thank you very much. Savan, challenges, what do you think? Sorry, I'll start again. What do you think are the major challenges that you have faced because you're autistic, and how can society change this? For example, challenges in your daily life, music volume in shops, the needs of the autistic community during the past year, during COVID, things like that.
It's been a tough year for a lot of autistic people here in the UK. I think around the world especially as well. I would say that there are always going to be challenges. There's always going to be challenges into daily life. We have to adapt to the world, whereas the world hasn't adapted to us. Not that much. All we ask is for accommodations and support to just make it thrive in the work environment, especially. There are companies out there that are willing to hire autistic people and make the adaptations to each single autistic person, not a generalized approach. That's something that, because every single person's different with their needs. We might have similar stuff that we need for support, but each autistic person has their own support needs. And if they can communicate that through themselves or with someone else there, it will help in the long term. We need to have workplaces that are, and shops and everything, and places that allow us to have less noise, less noise to travel around the world, less noise in general.
Less noise in general.
Yeah.
Sure, lots of people would empathise with that. Maya, what do you think society can do to change?
I'm going to go with a bit more of a radical answer and just say, can we just knock society down and start again, please, and make it accessible to everyone? On a more serious note, I think that there are things that we can do to make society accessible, and the key thing in doing that is including the people who need to be able to access society. So don't just go ahead and make decisions thinking that you can speak on behalf of autistic people, for example, without actually speaking to autistic people and their families. And I think there are things happening now, like Autism Hour in certain shops, and autism-friendly screenings at cinemas and things like that. But there's so much more we need to do, and the basics are, we need to be able to access our basic rights like healthcare and education and employment. And until we can access those basic rights, then we can start to think about maybe the more subtle things within society.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think we're starting at home a little bit with the committee that I chair, and we're very much operating on a model of participatory research. I want to take that forward to eventually a model of what I would call emancipatory research, where that the research that is undertaken there helps remove barriers to inclusion. It has an impact on service providers and eventually in the long term on society itself to help remove barriers to inclusion. Marla, how do you think society can change?
I think it's a long way to go, Matt. But I think there's been so much awareness in the media, which I think is really fundamental and important. I also watched the same film that Sav referred to, My Name is Con, and that was like a breakthrough within the community, I feel, and it raised a lot of autism. I think the other breakthrough to consider is fighting for your child's education and their right to the education. And we had to go through 2 tribunals in 2014 and 2015. This was straight after the SEND reforms kicked in 2014. And rather than any mediation or any notice, we were served with tribunal papers, and we had to fight quite fiercely against a solicitor that was employed by the local authority at the time. And we were antagonised for months, saying we cannot have the placement that we wanted. We've got it in the end. And my son flourished there for the 3 years. And obviously things happened in between. And we had to then go through another 3 tribunals since June last year, just to get him the right post-16 provision that he is rightfully entitled to, and the education that he wants, the career.
Yes, I guess the rules, the laws and the rules that are there just need to be upheld and need to be properly adhere to. Sarai, what do you think? How do you think things can change, and do you think what can we do to negotiate cultural differences, for example, between South Africa and Germany?
I think there definitely needs to be a lot more cultural awareness. I'll just use a simple example of something that a phenomenon that I see in Germany. There are a lot of people who live in Germany who feel that people who come into Germany should make every effort to adopt the culture and the language and fit in, and which, that's, everyone's entitled to think that way. The thing is, though, it's much easier when someone can tell you, well, you know how in your culture you do this? Well, in our culture, we do this type of thing. It's easier. It's so much easier when there's an exchange, and that exchange is missing in both the medical field, but also in the general social environment. I mean, if neurotypicals could just be like, well, that we do, when we do this stuff, well, if you as an autistic person do this kind of stuff, and it's kind of the same. I'd love that. I mean, that would be fantastic. I think that would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you very much to our panelists for topic 3. Just going to move on to some questions. I will endeavour to try and get at least one question out of the Q&A, but we are going to kick off with some questions that we received during the sign-up. Maya, could you just tell us a little bit your thoughts on which issues that affect your life as an autistic person would you most like to be researched or better researched?
Personally, I think I may end up offending some researchers here. I think we need to move away from the biological models of what autism is, stop doing all the stuff around, or don't stop, but reduce the amount of money you're spending on trying to figure out what autism is and looking at people's brains and genetics and all that, and actually start looking at how we can make society and the services that we want to, or we need to access, less traumatic for autistic people. I would like to see a future where autistic people can grow up and live the lives that they want and choose to live, and engage with society without accruing trauma. And that society, or that eventuality, is not going to happen until we know how or why society currently isn't working. So it'd be great to have some more research around what barriers autistic people face, and then actually how do we address those barriers. So there's some really great research going on at the moment, but we need to do more of that type of research and less of, I wonder if we can cure autism. Can we not have that, please?
Yes, I can. Getting the medical model as much as possible. Yeah, I can certainly agree with that. Marla, what are the most important aspects when creating an educational environment for autistic pupils?
To have each child or young person, to have them completely sort of at the centre of the focus. That's got to be the preliminary focus to meet that every need. In terms of it's a really difficult one in the sense that, what can I say about it? Training is key. There's got to be a key focus with the strength of the person at the forefront. And each child, young person, adult should be treated with respect and dignity, and more importantly, treated equally, irrespective of gender, irrespective of background, and irrespective of their race. And I think that's got to be a lot more looked at. There's got to be a much more serene environment. There's got to be a lot more sort of training that goes out there. And it's like that famous saying, when you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. One box does not fit all. You just can't tick it all, that, oh yeah, they've got that. I mean, my son had clear example, like traits of autism, you know, the eye contact and so forth. Whereas my youngest one didn't. He masked a lot of it, and he wasn't diagnosed until he was a lot older. So there's got to be a lot more sort of information. There's got to be a lot more sort of joined up services, and there's got to be a lot more sort of like focus on this. And as Mayor said, it's got to be more sort of geared towards, you know, what happens next. There's access to services being a lot easier, rather than sort of like each time you try and access something or work on a different, like go for something like a blue badge or whatever, it's just got to be literally, it's got to be straightforward. You know, there shouldn't be so much paper trail and so much red tape around anything you want to do. And
they are in themselves. They are barriers to inclusion. Sarai, could you just give us some of your thoughts on autism and multilingualism? Someone in the Q&A said that my son's school has exempt him from learning the normally prerequisite second language because he's autistic, as it will be confusing for him. I feel otherwise. What's your views on that?
I don't think that there's any research that would support specifically autistic children becoming confused by more than one language. I believe, and I haven't backed this up with research, but from what I've read, I believe that it's partly because of the way that we encode information as autistic people. We have I would think of it as we have a very nice storage system for putting information into. The problem is usually getting the information out of there and putting it in a way that the rest of the world understands. But when it comes to encoding information, I think we're actually, as autistic people, very good at that. So I would actually go the other way and say, actually encourage autistic children to learn more languages. It gives you a skill that you can later use to, I mean, like in my case, I'll obviously say make money, but it gives you a skill, and it also gives you a lot of self-confidence to be able to do something and stick with something that other people aren't always able.
Definitely. Savan, just very, very quickly, do you feel it's better for characters with autism to be portrayed by actors with autism?
Yes. It just makes the experiences more authentic, and that goes with everyone. It just makes things much more. Oh, an actual autistic actor is actually portraying someone who's autistic, because then it actually encourages any future autistic people to go into acting a bit more, and encourage them to go in and portray these roles, but also be able to portray neurotypical people as well, much more as well. It just makes it, because I did drama in primary school and in high school, and I loved it. Absolutely.
I think it's very valuable for autistic people to be able to. I think it can potentially be therapeutic for autistic people to be able to have experiences as other people. Thank you very much, Sav. It's been a fantastic discussion from all of our panelists. Unfortunately, we are running out of time for more questions from the audience, but you can continue the discussion on Twitter, on our Twitter page, or on the YouTube channel. For now, I'd like to thank all of our panel members for providing truly valuable insights into the lives of autistic people. Stick with us for our next panel discussion shortly. Back to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, our panelists. That was absolutely fantastic. Some great discussions, and I'm really sorry that we can't answer all those Q&A questions, but really good to see so much interest in the topics we're talking about. We just want to introduce a quick poll, again for you before we go to the interval, and we'll have a 10-minute break so you can go to the toilet, get a drink, and return for the next panel. So you should see a poll popping up on your screen any moment now, and if you're happy to answer that would be great. We're going to have a 10-minute break where we'll also be presenting a video which showcases more experiences from the autistic community. For versions of this with Japanese and French subtitles, thanks to our colleagues in Japan and Belgium, you can please go to our YouTube channel. But if not, then stay tuned here and you can watch the video for the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll be back for panel 2. And we'll start that about 5 minutes later than scheduled. Sorry to everybody for that, but the discussions were so great that we couldn't break that off earlier. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
We asked a variety of autistic individuals about the joys and challenges of being autistic.
To share a challenge that I face as an autistic person, I'm very bad at working in hierarchies. So that means that if somebody has a certain position, I can be very judgmental and I won't accept authority derived on position. I'll look much more at my perception of people's ability rather than necessarily position they have, and so as a result I tend to cause a lot of drama.
Les difficultés, c'est plutôt les relations sociales en général. C'est parfois une gestion des émotions qui peut être progressive à un moment si on n'apprend pas, si on ne s'entraîne pas à fond à gérer ses émotions.
Challenges are excessive over-worrying and anxiety, particularly in any social situation, if I'm alone or I feel uneasy. Coping with change is very difficult and means I'll often stay in unhealthy situations rather than try to change them. Making friends is also a challenge, and I can struggle with where to start and stop talking in a conversation. I find it hard to relax and can appear rather rigid, preferring my own company or a few trusted friends. It's hard to make people really understand how much I worry about things.
So in my experience of autism, there is some great traits that actually come with it. So, for example, I have the ability to think very probabilistically about problems, and that came to fruition when I was working on a lot of statistics and a lot of mathematics. I have a brain for that sort of area.
Une autre joie que je vis, c'est le fait d'être authentique parce que je me soucie pas beaucoup des regards des autres. Donc si j'ai envie de danser dans la rue avec mon fils, je danse dans la rue avec mon fils et ça me gêne pas du tout, même si je sais que les gens peuvent se demander si je suis pas un peu folle.
The challenges of being autistic are social interaction, especially in groups of more than 2 people. I get left out and annoyed because I'm not given the opportunity to speak. So when I go into withdrawal mode, not talking, looking around and fidgeting.
There is 2. 1, I have very good hearing. I can hear anything. And 2, I don't give up. I'm resilient.
学生時代はレポートなどにおいてもテーマを何にするかなかなか決めることができず、外部で決めてもらってもそれが自分とって意味があると信じられることができずに、結局つまりは締め切りに間に合わせることがなかなかできませんでした。情報のまとめで苦手と評されることもあるようですが、それも関係しているのかなと考えております。以上です。ありがとうございました。
Et alors, un autre défi de l'autisme, c'est vivre dans un monde qui n'est pas adapté à nos particularités sensorielles. Par exemple, le bruit des trams, le mouvement, le soleil, voilà, ça nous agresse constamment et les gens ne comprennent pas parce qu'on prend sur nous, mais c'est très très dur.
I attribute my imagination and creativity to being autistic and dyslexic. I seem to be able to pick up patterns very easily and can see patterns and how they develop. So I can create anything with wool and material by crocheting or sewing, frequently without a pattern, for example toys, animals, bags, etc. I can look at packaging that I've finished with and I'm going to recycle and think, what can I do with that?
One of the biggest challenges for me growing up was being able to make small talk and just ordinary conversation, and I would just launch into discussions. I was called out on it my freshman year in high school and really worked on it.
The joy for me is through running my own company, I have what I call freedom, but really it's control. I'm able to control the direction and strategy of my work, of my business, who I work with, what the kind of the rhythms and routines are, and also the environment and the culture and the processes and what it's like to work. So the restrictions that my autism puts on me has also allowed me to find a solution in my life that, it gives me financial freedom and also an opportunity to work in the ways that are best for me.
But the joys are when you tell people that you're autistic, like places like in like shopping places like Aldi's, just hope I'm allowed to do that, or other shopping big supermarkets. Once you tell them, they're like, okay, fine, and if there's anything that you want, please do tell us and we'll try and help as much as you can. Which I have had the experience of that, and it is absolutely brilliant. And when I was told about the sunflower lanyard, everything was just so much easier, and it was brilliant.
Quelles sont les joies de l'autisme? Tout d'abord, lorsqu'on apprend à s'intéresser à un domaine en particulier, on peut complètement s'épanouir là-dedans. Je trouve que ça n'a pas de prix personnellement, c'est vraiment chouette. Ça permet de se passer de beaucoup de choses, notamment les relations sociales superficielles où on est avec des gens qui parlent de choses ultra banales. Nous, ça peut vite nous ennuyer, mais voilà, lorsqu'on s'intéresse à certains sujets, qu'on apprend sur eux, ça peut vraiment rendre heureux et pour moi, c'est vraiment cool, quoi.
Things that I find difficult because of my Asperger's are socialising and meltdowns. Meltdown. No control. Not a body experience. Mind's a mess. Emotions have won. Can stop this, they shout. You can control this. Tears. More and more. You feel bad. A day is wrecked. Shut down. Tear apart. Until it stops. Exhausted. Shaking. Recognisable. Just bones in a shell. No longer human. And not you.
The joys of being autistic is when I am going through a good spell in my life, I am able to learn with ease and build interests and hobbies that I do well in. My intelligence level becomes high and able to work to a very high standard, provided I am given adequate time to complete the task.
私は3歳から自閉症だと診断されて支援や理解をしていただきました。でその中で、周りの皆様に支えられて、自己肯定感を高めて生活することができました。幼少期から支えてくださる方々に感謝しております。
The joys of being autistic for me include my amazing and very colourful imagination. I'm very accepting of other people's differences, also my integrity and my often childlike view of the world. I pay attention to small details and like to do things properly. People tell me I'm very observant of others' feelings. I'm great at remembering people's names and I have an excellent memory for places that I visited.
I also have quite strong hindrances, especially in recognising facial emotions and especially as well the plosivity of consonants I fail to discriminate against. So it makes it quite difficult just for me to be able to even recognise that someone is speaking to me in a positive or negative way. It makes it hard to discriminate between sarcasm and even between different accents, and it comes across quite ignorant, especially from my perspective. However, I try to do the best as I can, and do you know what? I'm positive about me being ASD, me having ASD, and I'm positive about sharing my experiences with it.
Okay, so hopefully we've got the majority of people back with us. Just before we go into panel 2, I am ready here with the poll, the results to the latest poll that you've all filled in. So we asked you whether you had heard of consultancy groups, and actually a large majority of you said you hadn't, and that therefore you hadn't used them in whatever profession it is that you are in. But actually really great for what we're trying to raise awareness for is that most of you said you would use or consider using a consultancy group in the future. So thank you very much everyone for sharing those thoughts. That's really good to see. I'll stop sharing that. And now I can hand back then to Matt, who's going to then introduce panel 2 to us. So thank you very much, Matt, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and welcome back.
You're muted at the moment, Matt. Sorry.
Oh, am I? Can you hear me now?
Oh, we still can't hear you, actually. Is your microphone off?
I can hear you.
I can also hear you, okay.
Yeah, it's just you, Sophie.
Sorry. Yes, I had my sound down, so carry on. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our second panel of the evening. Actually, just to pick up on something from the poll there, just to say that B Part Consultancy Committee, we do accept external research for us to evaluate. That is a service that we provide. So if you are interested in using a consultancy group in the future, and one that has a good deal of experience, this is a shameful plug, I understand that, but it's my job, then please get in contact with us here at the Autism Research Team at the University of Birmingham, and we will be happy to help. Anyway, without further ado, yes, this is our second panel where we are going to be discussing issues around diversity and inclusion in autism research. Very prescient indeed. Our first panelist is Desi Jones, who is joining us from Dallas. And a third-year PhD student. Desi has authored multiple publications about bias and acceptance and racial disparities in autism research. Desi, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your current priorities are for improving the lives of autistic individuals?
Yes, definitely. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Desi, and I work with Dr. Noah Sasson at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I'm really interested in how autistic people are perceived by others and how biases in non-autistic people shape the experiences of autistic adults. In terms of my priorities, I think that much greater focus should be placed on ways to improve autistic social experiences by targeting the biases and behaviors of non-autistic people. So instead of asking autistic people to mask their autistic traits, we should place more emphasis on reducing the stigmatization of these traits. Another priority of mine is ensuring that our research is representative of the diversity found in the autistic community. So earlier, Sarai and a lot of the panelists touched on the issue of how autism is often perceived as something that predominantly impacts white males, people of color, women, non-binary people, non-speaking people. I could go on, but these individuals are typically underrepresented in our research studies. So for many reasons, which I'll dive into later, I think that we need to do a better job of including these people. And then just finally, as a neurodivergent person myself, I have ADHD. I'm really interested in neurodiversity and ways to celebrate the strengths and differences that we see in neurodivergent people, including autistic people. So I'm really excited to talk about these topics today and to hear from the other panelists.
Excellent. We definitely look forward to hearing more from you. And as I said in the previous panel, the recent report that came out from Cambridge University highlighting the fact that autism prevalence is higher in black children than white children. Be interested to hear your thoughts on that later. Thank you very much, Desi. I'd like to introduce Rubes Walsh, who is joining us today from Amsterdam, where they are a PhD researcher studying socio-cognitive development and identity in autistic and transgender people. Rubes is also a trustee for the Gender Identity Research and Education Society. Rubes, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the research that you do.
Hi, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed everything I've had the opportunity to listen to so far, so thank you. I guess the first thing I am is a feminist, an intersectional one, I hope, and a scientist. I'm also autistic and a non-binary trans woman. And I think in general, as a sort of overarching theme of my work is about trying to sort of put back the social and political context that a lot of scientists would rather ignore and pretend would make them less objective, back into the science, and then also trying to sort of sneak scientific thinking back into social and political conversations, basically disguised as jokes. So that's kind of the overarching thing that I'm trying to do in my work. And I first became fascinated with the brain because of my mum's MS, which is a neurodegenerative condition. And understanding how something works is a really good way to kind of, at least for me, to kind of make it less scary. So at some point in my teen years, my two nerdy special interests, autistic special interests of music and neuroscience had the opportunity to combine, and I went and spent some time working with Lauren Stewart and Pam Heaton on the question of whether can autistic people experience musically evoked emotions, and starting from the assumption that autistic people are probably people with feelings, we came to the conclusion that they do. And then now my PhD is all about the social environment and secondary school and how that affects development and things like seeking social status versus seeking intimacy, self-silencing type behaviors, so camouflaging and masking, but also in typical individuals. And then I feel like I'm maybe going on a bit long, but
that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. We'll come to you shortly. Just as someone asked the question on the Q&A, just to quickly say that this video will be available on YouTube on the U21 Autism Research channel for you to share. I know someone said they wanted to show it to their class tomorrow, so you will be able to do that. Hopefully tomorrow you'll be able to do that. Now, despite the best efforts of his Wi-Fi, he is here joining us. James Cusack, who is autistic himself and the current CEO of Autistica, one of the leading autism charities in the UK. Before joining Autistica, James worked as a postdoctoral researcher investigating autism. James, would you mind telling us a bit more about yourself and what brought you to join a charity after your initial career in research?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and really great to be amongst such a great set of panelists. Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll start off with the caveat that I don't know what's going to happen with my Wi-Fi, so it's been fairly ropey so far. But if I disappear, I'll still try to contribute from audio. So yeah, I was diagnosed as being autistic at the age of 12, but I was identified quite early on, really at the age of 3. And so I've really had the privilege of growing up alongside a range of other autistic people with a range of different needs. And it became really it's really fascinating to me to understand how we can best support, such a diverse group of different autistic people. And so that's what led me to doing my PhD, my postdoc. But during that, I was also involved in a range of different policy discussions. So in particular, the Scottish Autism Strategy, which I helped campaign for and really led by the National Autistic Society. And as I came to the end of my postdoc, I really began to feel that really we needed to begin to think a lot more strategically about how autism research ultimately makes a difference. And that was really what I was passionate about, was really ensuring that autism research does ultimately end in improving autistic people's lives. And that was why I joined Autistica, because I saw a huge opportunity to do that. And I joined as a director of research just over 5 years ago. And since then, what we've really focused on doing is setting up the UK's first autism research network, which is now called the Autistica Network, to try and embed better involvement and participatory approaches into autism research, and to really ensure that we're thinking about how autism research ultimately ends in improving people's lives, and to ensure that we're really delivering autism research which really delivers on the priorities of the community that we serve, which is ultimately autistic people and their families. And so what we've really tried to do as a charity is ensure that our focus is as sharp as possible in that regard, in terms of meeting those priorities. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Just to say also that I think research is such an important and powerful tool for change as well. And so that's another reason why I was passionate about joining Autistica.
I certainly agree with you there, James. Thank you. And finally, lastly, but certainly not least, let me introduce to you Dr. Caroline Richards. Caroline is a clinical psychologist and senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham, one of my colleagues. Her research focuses on reducing negative clinical outcomes in children with neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism. Caroline, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your research?
Yeah, thank you ever so much for inviting me. It's a massive privilege to be able to sit on a panel alongside so many wonderful contributors. So thank you. Yeah, I am a clinical psychologist. I lead a team of researchers at the University of Birmingham, which is an immense privilege because I get to work with some of the smartest people I've ever met. And we are really focused on doing research that is going to make a real world difference here and now to mainly children with neurodevelopmental conditions. My background and training has been in intellectual disabilities research and crosses over into autism, and we'll kind of come on to that later, but I have a real passion for seeing our autism research be inclusive of the whole autism community, including those who have co-occurring intellectual disability or who speak few or no words and are often excluded from the mainstream autism research. I also, as perhaps many of the panel members also themselves are, represent different categories, different perspectives. So I'm also an older sister to an autistic young man who also has a severe intellectual disability. And I guess relevant to issues around diversity, I'm also biracial. I have a Black Jamaican dad and a white mum. So yeah, excited to see what we can talk about and kind of think about together this evening.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, let's get into our first topic. I would ask everybody to keep your answers as concise as possible. Obviously, I want to get to the root of issues, and everything you have to say is very valuable. But if we can keep it as concise as possible, because I definitely want to try and get some more questions from our audience towards the end. So our first topic is looking at general issues of diversity and inclusion within research. And I'd like to start this session with a question to all of you from the audience. In your opinion, how inclusive is autism research currently? If I could start with Rubes.
I think this is a funny question in a way, because autism research happens in a huge number of different spaces and involves a huge number of different people with different perspectives. So sometimes it's really very, very inclusive. And I think that the hallmarks of those kinds of spaces are places where, it's not the autistic people are present because of our expertise, and that expertise might be our professional expertise, or it might be our lived expertise, rather than as like a prop or a token. And I think it does seem to be happening more. I also think, though, that the spaces that are the most autism inclusive in research in general are spaces where the person in charge, the professor, the principal investigator, the head of the lab, whoever, is autistic. And I think that that also shows up in the research that's produced, which isn't to say that non-autistic researchers can't do good research, of course, but in terms of research that is inclusive, sort of all the way through, that really does seem to be the best predictor. And of course, there's a flip side, right? Like, there's loads of researchers whose interest is still, let's do an early intervention that will teach people how to mask lots and not worry about what effect that might have on their well-being because it makes other people more comfortable. Or let's try and find a cure because that's obviously completely, possible and desirable. That was sarcasm. There's constant references to a deficit. I mean, how many times have you started reading a paper on autism and the first thing it says is autism is a developmental disorder characterized by a persistent deficit in empathy? And there's this just, there's the lacking insight thing. So if autistic people, but do they really understand what's going on for themselves as well as we from the outside can tell? And then, it's this insistence that an empathy deficit is so central to what autism is, makes it quite hard actually just to sit and do the reading, because it's incredibly dehumanizing to be told that you don't empathize when maybe not any, but I think a lot of autistic people will tell you that we really do experience empathy. It's just different. Yes. And then, I have a couple of slightly funny, slightly depressing examples of things. Like, I went to a conference, I won't say which conference, on autism research, where the hall with all the posters with people's projects on was just, I couldn't be in there for more than 5 minutes. And I'm not at the high end of like sensory sensitivity of the whole spectrum of autistic people. I'm not somebody who suffers from it that much in that way, but I couldn't be there. And so that was one less autistic researcher having a conversation about autism research at that autism conference. And I think quite often, at least in the spaces I encounter, the problem comes because people are complacent. They think that because they are a psychologist or a neuroscientist or a medical professional, that they couldn't possibly be biased, that they definitely get it. And the reality is they don't, because none of us do. In the end, I think to really understand what it's like being autistic, you just have to be autistic. And I think that, in a way, trying to understand autism, and certainly when we talk about sort of like ontologies of autism, like what is it? We're really getting into territory of what is the human condition type questions then, which just, so I had a prospective PhD supervisor tell me he thought I wasn't autistic really, but at least I found a research interest out of it. I thought that was quite amusing. And then the other thing that bothers me,
people who, as you said earlier, people who, because of their qualifications and experience, they feel qualified to make kind of assumptions like that, and to actually say it to people. And it's one of the reasons, some of the other points you said, it's why I'm very keen for kind of the introduction of some of the ideas. My first degree was disability studies, and I'm keen for some of the ideas and principles of disability studies to kind of enter the lexicon in autism research a lot more. Thank you, Rubes. Desi, the same question to you. How inclusive is autism research currently, in your opinion? Oh, you're muted, Desi.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I love working as an autism researcher, but I really do have to be honest here. I think that the field of autism research, especially in the United States where I am, has a serious problem with inclusivity. So an example of this is while more journals are encouraging the report of participant demographics, an overwhelming number of autism research studies fail to even report this information. And then if you look at those that do report demographic information, we find that the majority of participants are white, middle-class children with IQs in the average range. So this leaves out a significant portion of the autistic population. And then in addition to that, we find that the majority of validated autism research measures are in English. So we often don't have the appropriate tools to diagnose autism in populations where English isn't the first language, including immigrants or people in many low or middle income countries who already experience trouble accessing these services. And then in addition to all of this, lack of diversity in participants and access to services, we also find that autism researchers aren't very diverse either. So people from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds make a very small percentage of autism researchers, especially at the higher career levels, such as tenured positions. And even autistic people themselves, as Rubes mentioned, fail to have their voices heard when they try to contribute to research that's about them and these research spaces. So, like I said, I do love being an autism researcher. I love this field, and I think that when you love something, it's natural to want to see it grow and improve. So I really hope that conversations and discussions like what we're having today can help the field to grow and become more inclusive. I do have hope. I know a lot of people who are really positive and really want to involve autistic more. I think it's just a matter of encouraging people in ways to teach people how to do this and how to make the field more inclusive.
Okay, thank you, Desi. So I'm going to move on to topic 2 so we can get into the real meat of discussion. I'll come to you, Caroline. You're an older, as you said, you're an older sister to your brother who is autistic and has a severe intellectual disability. How have your own personal experiences informed what you do as a clinical psychologist and researcher?
I feel incredibly privileged to know my brother and love my brother, as I'm sure everyone feels about their own sibling. He's obviously the best version of a sibling, clearly, I'm going to say that. But I think that my relationship with him means that my first experience of autism wasn't as something to be studied, but it was as a person to have a relationship with. And it was as somebody to understand and learn from. And increasingly, as his high levels of support needs became apparent, it was somebody to advocate with and for, so that he could live the happiest and healthiest life that was possible for him. And so when I later came to study psychology, my focus on autism wasn't kind of informed by textbooks, but was shaped by a relational experience of an autistic person. And I think that had a huge impact on, I hope, the way that I do research, but also the focus of my research. Our lab almost exclusively focuses on the things that Maya touched on earlier. So we don't do research into cause. We don't really do any neuroimaging research. We focus on the clinical challenges that are faced more commonly by autistic people than by non-autistic people. We focus on things like sleep problems, problems with mental health, and behaviours that can be perceived as challenging. Our research is all about trying to understand why for some autistic people those difficulties are higher than for other autistic people, and thinking about how we can alter service design and service delivery to change that. I I guess the other focus is this real strong interest in including people who also have an intellectual disability in that research. So not solely relying on research that requires you to verbally express your thoughts and opinions about things as an autistic person, but drawing on approaches that can use people's behaviour, other ways that people express themselves, to collect meaningful, valid data that can tell us something about mechanisms, that can tell us something about how best to support somebody for the best possible outcomes. So I have a lot to thank him for. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. James, we have an audience question for you. How can we best involve autistic people in autism research, do you feel?
So I think it's important if you're going to involve autistic people in research, and in my experience, I've been involved in examples where it's been done well and when it's been done less well, to be honest with you. I think the key thing is to ensure that you're involving people as early as possible, so that you don't have the research fully designed, then you involve people in a sort of focus group way. I think to have people involved early doors is really, really important to ensure there's a shared respect and values for people's different types of knowledge, because everyone brings different lived experience, different knowledge, and you know, I think there's sometimes this sort of false dichotomy between autistic people and researchers, and you know, it's important to remember autistic people have expertise beyond their lived experience, and researchers have lived experience which affects their expertise, and so on, to ensure that those things, and to ensure that you have that respect and understanding that everyone brings different things to the table. To ensure that there's a real understanding in terms of how you're going to work together, having clear boundaries and rules in terms of what your approach is going to be. In my experience, it has been really, really important, and to also create structures to ensure that involvement has meaningful impact, to ensure that if you're involving autistic people in their families, that they're being compensated appropriately for their time as well. I think is just a really, really key principle. And to be innovative and think about different ways in which you can involve a diverse range of different perspectives. And so we've done things like workshops in the past, but there's a range of different ways that you can involve people. And I think different approaches are useful for different people as well.
Thank you very much. Desi, why do you feel it's so important that we have more Black and minority ethnic researchers?
Yes, so in the United States, there has been a really painful history involving Black Americans' role in research and medicine. So Black people have been involved in a number of unethical studies that have resulted in long-term harm and even death. The most famous of these is the Tuskegee syphilis study. I'm not sure how familiar people outside of the US are with it, but researchers withheld medical treatment from hundreds of Black men without their consent and did not allow them to receive outside treatment for syphilis, just so they could study what happened. And while I wish I could say that instances like this were a thing of the past, the overt medical abuse does continue today. So, for example, many Black, Latina, and Indigenous women in prisons face forced sterilization. So abuses like this have led to a really strong and, in my opinion, completely justified distrust of science and research in the Black community. But here's the interesting thing. Research does suggest that when Black patients have a doctor who's also Black, they feel more comfortable, more trusting, and they have better health outcomes. So we think this could be applied to autism research too. In fact, many Black caregivers report feeling that white researchers can't understand their experiences. And some even report that they felt their providers were racially insensitive or had biases and misconceptions about Black family structures that were really offensive and harmful. So having people from diverse backgrounds get involved in our research may help to increase racial sensitivity in researchers and help us to build better relationships with people in racial and ethnic minority communities. And this can help people from these backgrounds, including Black people, to feel more comfortable and more open to participating in our research.
You recently designed an autism acceptance training program which targeted biases that non-autistic people have about people with autism. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So we actually adapted our training program. It was previously designed by researchers at Simon Fraser University in Canada. It was an in-person training for high school students, developed in collaboration with a group of autistic adults, kind of like what we talked about earlier. But it included short clips of autistic people just describing their experiences. Then it had information on autistic strengths, neurodiversity, recommendations on how to interact with autistic people, even a simulation of sensory overload. So we adapted this for an adult audience. I had a narration added to make it a training video instead of an in-person training. And we wanted to see whether this autism-specific training did a better job at reducing biases toward autism compared to a more general mental health focused training. And then in addition to a comparison to no training at all. And we found that that our training did reduce a lot of explicit biases toward autism. So people who did our training compared to people who did just general mental health training or no training at all had fewer instances of these more overt forms of prejudice. So they had better first impressions of autistic adults, fewer misconceptions about autism, more favorable beliefs about autistic abilities. But when we looked at implicit biases, which are more automatic, unconscious associations that we make, we found that participants, regardless of whether or not they received training, made associations between autism and unpleasant personal attributes like dependency, dangerousness, social awkwardness. So the training, while it helped with some of these forms of bias, it didn't do enough to help with all forms. And we don't know whether it translates to real world interactions yet. So we still need further research, further work to see how to improve these things.
Thank you, Des. It sounds very worthwhile. Just to continue on the subject of race, just for one last question before I come to Rubes. Caroline, you're one of the currently very few people of colour within autism research. What has this been like for you, and can you tell us why academics from POC backgrounds are underrepresented in autism research, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm going to have to speak very carefully because there's in the UK been a governmental report produced today which might disagree with some of my opinions on this. However, what I would want to start by saying is I've been incredibly well supported through my career, and I think sometimes we don't see the privilege that people carry. I want to make that clear kind of upfront. My dad has a PhD. He was a young Black man in the 70s getting a PhD in London, and that had a huge impact on what I believed I could achieve. I've also been really well supported by some really progressive, fantastic white researchers who've used their voices to give me space and lift me up. What I would say is that for the first, 8 or 9 years of my training at university level, I did a lot of sort of degree study, a bit of a geek. I was not taught by a single person who was not white. And that has an impact on your career trajectory and on your beliefs about the world. There's this kind of old adage that you can't be what you can't see. And I really believe that. And so I think there is a huge challenge in academia and in autism research specifically about who we see, whose voices are primary. And they are currently not representative of a population of researchers at even an undergraduate level. Those who rise to the top are not representative of that initial pool, but they're also not representative of the service users that we seek to support. They're not representative of the autism world. So I think there's a lot we need to be doing differently and better. What do I think is the problem? I think there are lots of problems, but there's clearly a very leaky pipeline from early education through to senior academic positions. And some of that has to be due to structural and institutional problems within the system. It has to be. And those require tackling by positive but intentional approaches that help people to overcome some of those challenges.
Could I just ask you in from what you gleaned from that report or the reports of the report this morning, was there anything that was in it that you think would be constructive, would be a positive way forward?
I have to say I haven't read it all yet. And so it would be unfair of me to speak out of turn, and probably the sections I've read might be the most politically charged. And so I think I'm sure there is good work in there. I know there are people that have contributed to that who do believe there are systemic challenges within the system, but can also see ways of us moving towards that. But I think one of the things we definitely shouldn't do is minimize the voices of people who are minoritized, who are saying these systems produce barriers.
Okay.
So I do need to give it a good read, and I'm sure there's some good stuff in there.
Thank you, Caroline. Rubes, another group that is currently underrepresented in autism research is cis and transgender females and non-binary identifying individuals. How do you think the way in which autistic traits are measured is problematic for women and minorities and leads to non-diagnosis?
Well, I think in the previous panel, Sari mentioned Sheldon as the kind of archetypal idea of what an autistic person is. And also, she also alluded to the fact that he might not really meet the criteria. So I think that there's clearly a cultural understanding of what autism is that is skews very male and also very kind of masculine, if you like. And I think it's important to remember where this all started, right? Like the conversations that we're having now about autistic people. You know, Melanie Ergo in her book on authoring autism talks about the idea that, you know, any statement about autism is a statement about the diagnostic criteria, because that's kind of all we've got to orient ourselves to this phenomenon, if you like. And those criteria are a product of a social process that began with a couple of Nazis going, oh well, these little boys who are very smart, they're little professors and they find social interaction difficult, and you know, maybe this is a type of autistic that we don't just dispose of, right? And so there's this I've written in my notes colonial gender norms. This is about colonial gender norms. It's about the idea of empathy and social communication as women's work, and science as a masculine thing, or systematic thinking as a masculine thing. I mean, even going so far back as the refrigerator mothers theory, you know, it's all about this idea of a particular acceptable way of having a family, and having relationships between people, and how gender and sex are a part of that. So I think that's how we've got to a situation where we have criteria that are so skewed in the way that they are. But I also think that we have to remember that, you know, even if we assumed that the criteria were objective and could pick up, you know, reliably, you know, they were biomarkers instead, let's say, or they wouldn't be biomarkers. But what I'm getting at is there are reasons why people are socialized as women, whether that's implicitly or explicitly socialized as women or girls, tend to do social communication in a way that is less noticeably autistic. And I think it comes back to this thing of empathy as women's work, but it's also in parenting styles. There's a classic study from the 90s, I think, showing that parents, when they think that the infant is a girl, they do a lot more talking, and when they think it's a boy, they do a lot more like physical play, or like you know, things where motor and spatial reasoning are important. And so we get this, we have this situation where little, you know, young autistic people who are being socialized as female in whatever way that's happening are developing in a different social environment effectively from the boys. And I think, you know, Maya touched on this idea as well about saying, you know, she was quiet, she wasn't disruptive. I think there's a lot of pressure on girls to be good girls in a way that doesn't necessarily apply to boys. And of course, this is all terribly binary, and I'm not.
It's something I've not. It's something it's something I've not thought about before. Actually, yes, the role of kind of the way that gender normative and heteronormative society basically, it makes it so much more difficult to expose the differences in autistic girls. And that's it's almost like the system is set up to diagnose autistic boys, but not so much autistic girls. Thank you, Rubes. Just kind of, I think there's a question to bring this section to a close. After hearing what you've heard, James, I'm kind of bearing it in mind, can you share with us Autisticus' visions going forwards and how you are advocating for more inclusive autism research?
So, you know, I think for us, I think there's something fairly fundamental here, which is that autistic people and their families, from the moment they find out they're autistic, are, you know, really exposed to quite significant uncertainty around what happens next, and we don't really expose other groups of people to this uncertainty. And so, as an autism research charity, I think one of the things that's really key for us is to really shout about the fact that research and evidence is actually really critical for autistic people and their families, and because we don't try things on other groups of people that don't work, but we seem to think that this is something that is acceptable for autistic people and their families, and we should really not be doing that. And actually, so I think it's really key that we make it clear that research and evidence is so important, and I find it slightly odd that you know, and slightly abusive at times, that autistic people are just exposed to all sorts of different therapies and approaches which aren't proven. I think also we need to really ensure that research has a real theory of change and ultimately delivers for autistic people. And for us, I mean, I've just recently become chief executive of Autistic over the last few months, and I think for us, what we really want to do is be setting big goals over the next decade to ensure that over the next 10 years, we really are ensuring that there is proven support for autistic people, you know, from day one, to ensure that autistic people have, again, proven support, you know, when they do have issues with anxiety and mental health, which we know is a real priority for autistic people and their families for research, to increase the rates of employment. You know, we know that from data from the Office of National Statistics that only 21.7% of autistic people are in employment. We know lots more autistic people would like to be in employment and have a huge amount to offer in that setting. We should be improving healthcare for autistic people. We know that life expectancy is lower than autistic people, you know, shockingly so, and so avoidably so, and that autistic people have increased numbers of health problems which aren't identified. So we're looking at how we can deliver health checks for autistic people. We need to improve the built environment and develop evidence around actually what that means, and not use, in some ways, vague phrases around building autism-friendly environments, but actually have robust evidence in place which teaches us how we can do that. And, you know, touching on the point that Desi was making earlier, we need to really improve attitudes and beliefs and behaviours around autism as well. And I think research in that area is really, really key. And I think historically that hasn't been seen as a research question, but I think it really does need to be, to really ensure that we're ultimately changing how people approach autism. And in terms of being more inclusive, again, I think, you know, we all have substantial amounts to do, and that includes Autistica, to ensure that we're including different groups appropriately in research. You know, charities have their own issues, and so there's a campaign at the moment out called Charity So White, which really shows that charities are overwhelmingly white as well as research. And so I think we have work to do to ensure that, you know, as a workplace, we're as inclusive as possible. I think it's about ensuring we've got an insight group of autistic people and family members. It's ensuring you're engaging with all a diverse range of communities and checking your assumptions and ensuring that your priorities are focused on that diverse range of experiences, and in doing so being comfortable with the fact that you will get conflicting views as well. And I think that that's something which we need to become more comfortable within autism research. There are different, autistic people are having very different lived experiences of the world, and that means that they're likely to have different views and experiences, and maybe will require different things from autism research.
I completely agree, and I also, I would say this, given my role, but I think getting used to hearing the voice of autistic people more and more, even when it makes researchers uncomfortable, even when researchers disagree with the autism community. At the end of the day, it is the autism community whose needs need to be served best. And as has been said a couple of times in both panels, it is autistic people who have that lived experience. No one else has that lived experience other than autistic people, and it's their voice that has to guide the way. Thank you very much to our panellists for that topic. We're going to move on to questions from the audience, and we're going to kick off with a question that was submitted in the sign-up and we're kicking off with one for Caroline. Caroline, what is the best way to support anxiety, distress in autistic individuals with learning disabilities who are non-verbal?
Okay, so I'm going to draw on some work that, in fact, Autistica are funding. Not my work, one of my colleagues in the Cerebra Network, Dr. Jane Waite, leads a programme of research at Aston University. And she's really working with her team to try and answer this question. I think if Jane was here, she would say a couple of things. The first thing she would say is that the tools we currently have to identify someone who is experiencing anxiety are not good enough to pick up anxiety in people who are autistic and also have a learning disability. So as clinicians, we often rely on people being able to say things like, when I go into this situation, I feel like this, or when this happens, I feel I need to avoid this. And those are the kinds of cues that help us to understand that what someone's experiencing is anxiety. If somebody can't talk to you about that internal experience, you have to look at other ways of trying to work out what they're experiencing. And one of our key challenges when somebody also has an intellectual disability or they speak few or no words is that the way that somebody might present might indicate they're experiencing anxiety, but it might indicate that they're in pain because they've got a headache. It might indicate that their mood is really low. It might indicate that they're really tired. And our tools at the moment, our assessment tools, do not well enough differentiate those different internal experiences for people who do not have the language to communicate that to us verbally. So one of the things Jane is working on is developing more precise tools to pick anxiety up. And that involves talking a lot with parents and carers who know their children and young people really well, but it also involves other methods of observing those young people themselves directly and finding ways from their behaviour for us to understand when they're anxious. Partly because we don't know how to identify anxiety very well, we also don't have a huge evidence base on how to treat anxiety in people who are autistic and who also have a learning disability. I think our assumption is that some of the strategies used in people who are non-autistic might also work in autistic populations. So we have a relatively good idea around psychological approaches to manage anxiety, but they haven't yet been tested. And actually, that's exactly the work that Autistica are funding Jane to do over the next few years. So watch this space, but I would also say don't assume that just because we don't know exactly what works yet, that we can't try some things that we think might work. So I'd encourage, if this is a specific question from somebody who themselves is autistic and has a learning disability or is supporting somebody who is, kind of don't be fobbed off by the fact that we don't yet know everything. We do know some things, and we might be thinking about strategies that minimize avoidance, strategies to reduce the physiological experience of distress through relaxation, other approaches.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Desi, how do you think we can best involve people from diverse communities in autism research?
Muting myself. So I think that we need to take a multifaceted approach to improving the involvement of people from diverse communities in our research. So it's really important to have people from diverse backgrounds contributing to a research team. I mentioned this earlier. So while I highlighted the importance of racial and ethnic diversity in these roles, but I also want to emphasize that I think it's also important to include autistic people themselves and autistic people of color in our research. In these roles, contributing to the studies and kind of as collaborators. So second, I think that we really need to promote community engagement. And when I say community engagement, what I mean is that we need to build meaningful connections with communities of color and work with community leaders to promote mutual trust and respect. So researchers need to step down from the ivory tower and work to disseminate our work to people in non-academic contexts, such as giving talks about autism acceptance at a local library or getting involved with a parent group and helping them navigate different systems. Autistic people of color can also be an important bridge between research and communities of color. They can help to build awareness by sharing their experiences with others. But you should never expect autistic people or people of color in the community to do this work for free. You really need to compensate them fairly if they're doing this. And then finally, I think that we should also work to address these racial disparities and racial biases in researchers and the work that we publish and promote cultural sensitivity. So this involves being open to feedback from community members and creating a space where they can voice their concerns without fear of retaliation, and then actually take an effort to respond to their feedback and make changes to make the work more accepting and inclusive for people so that they're comfortable coming in and can build trust in us. Trust is earned, it's not just a given.
Thank you, Desi. I think that's really, really valuable advice. Thank you, Rubes. I'm a white cisgendered gay man. We are very good at getting ourselves heard. In my experience, how do you feel that people on the autism spectrum can get involved in working in autism research, particularly other members of the LGBTQ community?
I think there are lots of different approaches, right? So there are roles where you are, if somebody is wanting to get involved in research but doesn't want to be a researcher, then there's the consultancy type stuff that you do, Matt, which I think is one really, really useful thing, but beyond that, I don't know much about it because it's not what I do. But I think that in terms of getting into research as a researcher, I think there are certainly a lot of barriers, but I think it's about knowing who your friends are. And I don't mean that in the playground way, but I mean like recognizing people who are going to have your back, which is not something that is necessarily super easy if you're autistic to identify those people. I sometimes wonder if part of why we find it hard to socially interact with typical people is because we are actually having to spend more effort looking out for the scary ones, but that's not the point of the question. So I think that the real that's really the big thing is to find people whose working framework, right? Like it doesn't matter whether somebody believes in weak central coherence or flattened priors, or, well, I was going to say the extreme male brain. That one, it does matter because they're wrong. But like, it's not about the scientific approach that somebody is taking. It's why they're doing the work. What is the purpose? Is it, I'm curious about these weird, strange people and you're one of them? Or is it, I'm curious about these people because they are people and I am a people? And I think, for me at least, the thing I always want to see in somebody I would want to collaborate with, if they're not autistic and they're working on autism stuff, is really that, James I think mentioned this notion earlier, that like people who bring kind of disability studies thinking with them into medical model type research, I think is really crucial, because if we're going to be able to understand the ways in which our experiences as autistic people, our differences as autistic people, if we're going to be able to understand the relationship between that and our way exaggerated risk of stress-related health problems, etc., we need to really dig into that interplay, right? So I think that's a research reason, really, right? But I think if you're an autistic person, you're working with somebody whose approach is to go, oh yeah, well, testosterone, then you're not. That's not somebody who's seeing you. And I think certainly when you're starting out in which I am, I mean, I'm only a PhD student. So when you're starting out, when you're a PhD student, you really need someone in your corner, someone who gets you. And then I think, if we're talking about somebody who is LGBTQ as well as autistic, I mean, first of all, there are a lot of us. And I think that's just on its own something that we should talk about, and maybe even be a little bit overtly happy about, that autistic people, it seems like, have a lot of courage to be who they are, even when we're told that we shouldn't be. And maybe that tells us something about autism as well as it does about LGBT people. But I think I think in a way it's a very similar argument, right? That if you want to find a place to work where you're going to be included as an LGBTQ person, you need to look at the way that those people are thinking about LGBTQ people. And if it doesn't show up in the work, if the publications don't reflect that deeper thinking, then there wasn't any point in doing the deeper thinking to begin with. So
yeah.
I don't know if that really answers the question, but I made some points.
Thank you, Reeves. I'm going to come to one final question for James, and then one final question for all of our panelists, and then we shall move to close. James, there has been, you mentioned low rates of employment amongst autistic people. I just wondered what you might say about the phenomenon of underreporting autism by adults in work, masking at work, a lack of access to support, especially for folks diagnosed as adults. That's a question from our audience. What would you have to say about that phenomenon?
So yeah, I think it's a huge issue, and there's no doubt that there are some people who are autistic who don't feel that they can report that they're autistic, or who may not know that they're autistic as well. So I think that has to be factored in. We fund a research initiative at University College London, which is looking at autism and employment. It's called DARE. And we see that there's significant barriers to entering work. So we know that from the moment the recruitment process begins, there's significant biases in place, and there are things that you can do to change that. And I think the real key principle here is that if your workplace recruits effectively, you will recruit autistic people. So, actually, if you have a process which is not biased, which is ultimately designed to attract the most talented people, you've got a really good chance that you will also be employing autistic people. And also what we see is that what a lot of this really boils down to in terms of disclosure in the workplace is workplaces becoming comfortable with difference and different ways of thinking and different approaches to things. And I really do believe that, if workplaces can come to understand and accept autistic people, then actually they can also accept other forms of neurodiversity and themselves as well. And I think, when we start thinking about reasonable adjustments, so things, that help deal with potentially sensory difficulties, things like noise cancelling headphones and so on. When we start thinking about these for autistic people, they apply to all people as well. And when we do that, everyone wins. And I think that's the real things that there appears to be a stigma behind admitting that you have any form of difference or different way of thinking. And we need to really remove that from the workplace and get autistic people to be comfortable with disclosing their diagnosis, but also to ensure that all people feel comfortable, making sure that they can disclose what their preferences are as well. And I hope that, throughout the pandemic, that conversation has certainly started. And then I think as well, it's about ensuring that, when people do disclose that they're autistic, that there are proper mechanisms for doing so. Because I think at the moment, according to the research that we funded, autistic people in many cases don't feel confident doing that. And I feel very conscious that, I'm in a very privileged position to be able to be open about who I am. But the reality is that because of the stigma that does exist around autism, quite understandably, a number of autistic people don't feel comfortable doing so. So there needs to be support in place to ensure that can happen, as well as huge changes in attitudes.
Thank you, James. Final question, very, very concise answers, please, everyone, if we can. But final question, which I think is very important, is what do we all feel what area in autism research is most understudied in your opinion? James, I'll kick off with you.
Okay, so for me, I think there's definitely a lack of understanding regarding how we reach underrepresented groups. But to focus on a specific topic, I would probably go back to the attitudes and understanding area, because I think that we understand an awful lot about things we're beginning to understand things about anxiety, but there's a lot of public awareness and public understanding campaigns going on, as we've seen this week and this month. I'm sure we'll see more of this month. But actually, it's really important that we think about how we change these attitudes and behaviours and implicit biases that Desi was referring to. And that's a research question. And if we don't treat it like a research question, the reality is we could end up wasting an awful lot of resource, not doing a very effective job of changing people's attitudes and understanding around autism.
Okay, thank you, James. Rubes, you're muted.
It's very connected to that. I would say there's the whole double empathy problem area has just kind of opened up and sort of moved over from disability studies really into the more sort of laboratory setting. And I think that's really going to be really, really beneficial to start to really understand how being misunderstood, right, by the fact that neurotypical people are bad at empathy when the person they're empathizing with is autistic, and understanding what role that has to play in the whole kind of developmental picture of autism is something I think is really, really, really important. And I think without it, we're not going to get much further in understanding any of the biological stuff anyway. I really think we need to integrate those. Okay,
thank you, Rubes. Caroline?
I think my answer actually is similar to the previous two. I think it's something about how do we as a society change the systems and structures, whether they be education or clinical provisions, so that all autistic people and all those with an intellectual disability, those without, have the chance to lead a life that for them is meaningful and happy and healthy, that isn't sort of focused on the outcomes that society tells us people should want, but is focused on the outcomes that autistic people want for themselves.
Thank you, Caroline. And Desi?
I think that it's essential that we incorporate more intersectional work. So right now there isn't much work at all looking at how things like, racial differences or gender differences, how those interact with autism to influence people's biases towards autistic people. So how do racial biases impact Black or Latinx or Asian autistic people? How does it interact their interactions with doctors, with the police? There are so many things that different diverse autistic people bring to the table that aren't being incorporated in these other areas of research. So I think you need to look at these things collectively as a whole to see how they interact. And that's really not something that we do right now.
Thank you, Desi. I mean, from my perspective, I feel it's not necessarily the research topics per se. My issue is with who is involved in the conversation, and the conversation between the autism community, academia, and service providers. Autistic people rely hugely on public services, third sector services, health, education services. They rely hugely on these, and from what I've seen and the feedback that I constantly get from the autistic community and the various stakeholders in it, is that that conversation is still, I was diagnosed when I was 13. That's nearly 18 years ago, and people were complaining about the same thing then. Is that people communication is still not effective, and leads to so many problems. So for me, I feel that in order to get research happening in the right way, that conversation needs to become far more inclusive in all kinds of ways. Thank you very, very much to our panelists for their input on all of those topics. And sadly, our time for audience questions is up now as well. But as with the first session, I invite you all to continue the discussion on our YouTube channel and on our Twitter page. I ask all of our panelists who've been with us this evening to, if they are able to be present and to continue that conversation. I'm sure there are lots of people who'd like to ask you a lot of questions. There have been a lot of really wonderful questions posted in the Q&A. Sadly, we can't come to them during this session, but hopefully we can address them in social media. A big thanks to the members of our second panel. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussions. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and experiences with us. And back to Sophie. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matt. And obviously a huge thank you to our panelists once again. Those were brilliant discussions, and apologies to everyone at home. I'm sure you don't mind. We ran over a little bit just so that we could squeeze in some of those extra questions, which were brilliant. And I think as my perspective as an autism researcher, there's a lot that we can take away from those discussions. But yeah, we do hope that this contributes and inspires other researchers and other individuals that work with individuals with autism to try and promote these elements of diversity and inclusion. We're just going to very quickly finish with a poll, which you should see appear on your screen now, if you're happy to do our final poll for us. And then we also just want to end by telling the autistic community a little bit about how they can get involved in some of our research. So if you'd like to hear more about our research, you can sign up to our mailing list using the QR code that you should see on your screen now. You can also follow us on Twitter, check out our website, or drop us an email. And examples of some of the questions that we want to ask via the U21 Autism Research Network. These include what autism-related language is globally most preferred? How and why does autism acceptance differ across countries? And how does acceptance affect mental health? And also trying to understand differences between autistic people in aspects such as sleep quality and camouflaging behaviours. And we hope that the network can investigate some of these things shortly. What I'm going to do though is just report those results back to you now. It looks as though you members of the audience are very interested in how we can look at improving mental health in autistic individuals, which hopefully is in line with some of the research that we're trying to do. But it looks as though across the board you're interested in many of these topics that we've posted in the poll. And this will help us to inform and guide our future research. So thank you very much for all taking part in that poll. Yeah, so I'm going to hand back to Matt just to see if he has any final words he wants to say. And thank you everyone that came to the event. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We are really grateful, and for all of you that have tuned in this evening or whatever time it is, wherever you are. So thank you very much from me.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and once again a massive thanks to the team at the U21 Autism Research Network. I can't tell you how much work they have put into this, how on the ball they have been from the start, the organisational skills and how wonderfully presented everything is. I mean, look at that logo, it's wonderful. So a big thanks to them, and a final thanks to all of the panel members this evening. Your insight and your experiences have been truly remarkable, and I hope we'll continue to have people will keep them in their heads and have a big impact for some time to come. Diversity is an issue that, as I said at the start, is ever prescient. It becomes more and more so with each passing day, and it seems that there isn't an area in society that is untouched by it as an issue. I feel that autistic people, the autism community need to become louder, need to become noisier in demanding changes to the way that they are treated by service providers, by academia, and by society as a whole. Academia is uniquely placed to have a huge impact on the way the rest of society views us. And it's through academia that systemic changes can take place, which ultimately will result in a massive improvement to the lives of autistic people and their families and service providers. So I hope that the conversation is going to continue on social media. I hope that I know that I'm coming away from this with some actions, not just thoughts, but some actions. I'm very keen to get somebody from the Job Centre, that's the employment agency here in the United Kingdom. Very keen to get someone from the Job Centre involved with our consultancy committee, because it was highlighted. I think it was the second or third most popular answer in that final poll. It's supporting autistic people in the workplace, and that's a very important. It's through work and through economic well-being. That is one of the answers to improving the lot of autistic people. So that is something that I'm definitely going to be doing going forward from this. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us across the globe. We hope that you will join us for our next event. I'm not too sure what that is. Maybe Sophie does. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.